Okay, so to cap it off, we're just gonna kind of go through some diploma-style questions just to kind of bring these last few ideas home. Okay, so we'll just go through these. Think about it. They're mostly numeric response type questions. So a group of students sets up this apparatus. I really wanted to show you this kind of question. This is the Diploma started doing these a few years ago, okay? And I think of them as choose your own adventure, okay? So there are many correct answers, but of course not all answers are going to be correct. So you can actually choose, maybe not all of these, but you can choose multiple options from here, and then that will influence what your next choices will be, okay? So let's just take a look at our options. So it's basically, what is this question doing? It's saying choose one research question that you could investigate from the list given and based on the apparatus you've been shown, and then match three of the variables to their roles in the investigation. So what those variables manipulated, responding, or controlled based on what you've chosen to be your research question. So we recognize this setup very similar to one we did last topic, right? Essentially, current is going to flow through this wire here. In the portion that's perpendicular, it will feel a perpendicular magnetic force, and then that will register as a reading on the scale. So let's just say, can we investigate research question 1? It's asking, does the length of the wire in the magnetic field affect the magnetic force? Is that something we could investigate here? Yeah, I would say so, right? We can change the length of the wire that is in the magnetic field. We could move it forward so that only this little back part is in, or backwards so the only one little part of it is in. We could definitely look at the effect that the length of the wire in that magnetic field has. So that is a valid research question. That is something we could look at. So let's choose our first adventure. Our first adventure will begin. We will set down the road with question number 1. Okay, if that's the case, what are we going to have to manipulate? Well, what are we asking? Your question that you're asking should tell you your manipulated variable, right? Otherwise, you haven't asked a very good question. So, does the length of the wire in the magnetic field affect the magnetic force? So, manipulated affects responding. So, what's our manipulated? It's the thing we're curious about its effect on our responding, right? So, the length of the wire in the magnetic field, that is our manipulated variable. So, 7. Okay, and we already kind of had the other part. The length of the manipulated always affects responding, right? So what's responding? Magnetic force. So out of these options, that would be number 6, right? The force on the wire is what is the response from our manipulated. What's one of the variables that we must then control? Well, we're not going to control our manipulator responding, so 6 and 7 are out. Would we have to control the strength of the C-shaped magnet? What variable is that? What's that really talking about? Really, that's talking about the magnetic field strength, right? Okay. Would we have to control the current in the wire? What do you think? Remember what we said about a good experiment? If you have 2 manipulated variables, you are no longer doing one experiment. You are doing 2 experiments, right? And you're not even really doing them properly. Because now when you see a change in your responding, you don't know which of your manipulated caused it, right? So since the magnetic force, our responding, also depends on current, yeah, we need to keep that constant, right? Otherwise, we're not looking at what L perpendicular causes a change in. We're looking at what the current might cause in it. And same goes for 8. I didn't go into as much depth for that, but same goes for the magnetic field strength, right? If we change either of those, we're not answering the question we set out to answer. So one of the variables that must be controlled, you could say 8 or 9. So right off the bat, just from question 1, we already have 2 possible correct answers that the diploma would have marked as correct, 1768 and 1769. Let's go back and dip back into our questions. Does the magnitude of the current in the wire affect the magnetic force? So does the magnitude of the current affect the magnetic force? Well, can we test that here? Yeah, we've got a variable power supply. We can crank up the voltage and increase the current, or crank it down and decrease the current. So yeah, we could do that and then record the response in the recorded force. So if we do research question 2, what are we now manipulating? Well, now we're manipulating the current, right? So that we can still see a response. What did it say? Remember, manipulated affects responding. So how does manipulated affect responding? Right, so just the general rule, manipulated affects responding. So our responding, once again, is going to be magnetic force. What must we control? Well, now we are testing the effect of I. So what do we have to keep constant? L and B. Really, ideally, everything else is controlled, right? That would be kind of the perfect experiment, which doesn't exist. So now it's 8 and 7, because we're going to manipulate 9 instead. Okay, let's look at the next research question. Does the strength of the magnetic field produced by the C-shaped magnet affect the magnetic force? So manipulated effects responding. Can we change that here? Well, yeah, right? We can put a different C-shaped magnet in. We can change out for a weaker or stronger one, okay? Keep everything else the same and change out the magnet we're using. So that is a valid research question that could be tested with this apparatus if you were so curious, okay? So 3, fine. What would we manipulate? Manipulated effects responding. So we're going to test the effect of changing the magnetic field strength, right? To again record a response. What did it say? Does it affect the magnetic force? So again, 6. Okay. What do we have to control? Now we're changing this. You guessed it. We got to control I and L perpendicular. So now we're going to have to control 7 and 9. All right. So just from those first 3, that's 6 correct answers, right? 2 here, 2 here, and 2 here. So 6 correct combinations. So that's a correct combination, that's a correct combination, and that's a correct combination. Let's take a quick look at 4. Does the direction of the electron flow affect the magnetic force? This is a great question, okay? In fact, this is even a good apparatus to test it. You could reverse these hookups and reverse electron flow, and then, however, when we go and look, are the variables here to test that given? Force on wire, sure, that could be our responding, but would manipulating any of these actually manipulate the direction of electron flow? I suppose you could kind of say that you're manipulating the current by reversing the electron flow. However, really it should say direction of current if that's what it wants it to mean, right? Again, we wouldn't be manipulating the current. We wouldn't be making it bigger, smaller, anything like that. We just need to be changing the direction. So it should be really clearly worded, direction of current in wire. Manipulating direction and manipulating magnitude, you're no longer asking, does the direction of electron flow have an effect, right? You're asking, does the direction have an effect and does the magnitude have an effect? Bad science. If you've got 2 manipulated, bad science. So 4 is actually not really an option. Nothing with 4, okay? 5, does the orientation of the wire relative to the external magnetic field affect the magnetic force? Again, that's a fine question. So does the orientation of the wire relative to the magnetic field? In other words, does changing the direction of this through, if you kind of tilt it towards us, away from us, maybe up, maybe down, how will that affect? You could do that. You could manipulate, for example, where theta is the angle between this and the horizontal or the vertical or whatever, okay? Only problem is that given as a variable? No, right? It's not. We can't manipulate that. So I would say 4 and 5 are kind of not options because variables to test aren't there. Okay, not that you couldn't do them with this setup, I think you could. However, the options they gave you, these variables to manipulate, control, and respond, really wouldn't let you properly test that. Okay, so a negatively charged glass bead is released from a location directly above 2 vertical oppositely charged plates. So what kind of field exists between the plates? For sure, definitely an electric field. Okay, positively charged plate, negatively charged plate. So where should the electric field be going? Well, it's again defined as what an electric field would do. So that's what the electric field would be. Okay, continuing on, and enters the region between the plates as shown below. So honestly, I'm not even going to keep reading. Let's just first think, what kind of force is this going to feel? Well, what's its charge? Negative. So will it feel a force with the electric field in the same direction, parallel to it, or will it feel a force anti-parallel to it? Remember, direction of the electric field is what a positive charge would feel. So this would be, that is what Fe is going to be, right? So if we want to just think, okay, so what's it going to do? It's going to do this, right? Unless we interfere somehow. Let's keep reading. But that's what it initially wants to do. Okay, one of these guys. So the electric force as the bead enters the regions between the plates. Oh, well, there we go. We already answered that, right? Since it's negative and this is an electric field, we have a negatively, right? We have a negatively charged plate over here. We have a positively charged plate over here. So the electric force will push it towards the positive plate. That's just law of charges, really, at the end of the day, right? Negative would go towards positive. So to the right. So that is option number 3. All right, what's the electric field in the region between the 2 plates? See what I mean? Just drawing a picture sometimes gets you half the work done anyway. So the electric field, always defined as what a positive charge would do. So this is going to go towards the negative plate, right? A positive charge, if placed here, would want to get away from the positive and go towards to the negative. So that is option 4 to the left. Net force acting on the glass bead. Be careful. Okay, why was it falling? Right? Was it accelerating before it entered these plates? You betcha. So there was a force acting on it. Let's draw a free body. Right? Why was it falling? Of course, because of gravity. So there was Fg, but then it entered the field and there was Fe, right? And so how do we get the net force of those two? Well, net force means add up all the forces. Forces are vectors, so to add vectors, we can do a vector addition diagram, right? Fg, tip to tail, Fe, and so F net looks like that. Something like that, right? From the beginning of the first to the end of the last. And so which of our options does that match? That matches number 1. Now, the magnetic field required for the glass bead to be undeflected. Okay, that's a good one. So if we're going to undeflect, if we're going to cause this to not be deflected, in other words, we're not going to let this happen. We don't want it to off to the right and hit that positively charged plate. So what kind of force do we need to apply? Well, we need to fight the electric force, right? We need to stop this from happening, so we need to apply a force like that, right? We need to apply a force like that. Okay, now, rookie mistake here, right? Very common mistake would be to say, okay, great, got the magnetic force, that's number 4. Is that the magnetic field? No, that's the magnetic force. How do you find magnetic field? Well, once you've got the force, that's going to take a hand rule, right? So if the resulting force was that, okay, start with this is a negatively charged glass bead. Take out your left hand, point your palm in the direction the force needs to go, and then where does your thumb go? Well, remember, thumb is the direction of the moving charge. So your thumb should be towards the bottom of the page because that's how the negative charge was moving, right? So if you did it correctly, if you followed your hand rule, your hand should look something like this. Oh dear, hopefully not too much like that, or you should see someone about that, okay? But it really doesn't look like it. So the palm is here, okay, pointing that way, right? The thumb is pointing down the page because that's the direction of motion of the negative charge. And so where does that leave your fingers pointing? Well, your fingers are pointing, if you did it correctly, into the page, right? I tried to show that by starting thicker here and then getting skinnier as they go away from you. Kind of doesn't look like that at all. But anyway, if you did it correctly, you should have been pointing your fingers, your magnetic field into the page. And so that would be number 9. Okay, we've seen this or something similar, right? A very strong bar magnet is dropped onto a foam block through a copper ring that has a slit cut into it, okay? So can Lenz's law really take effect here? Not in the sense that a current will truly flow, right? Charges will move, but they won't be able to actually completely complete a circuit. So when the south pole of the magnet moves into the ring from above, the direction the electrons inside the copper ring will move is from blank to blank. And compared to X, the nature of the charge on Y will be relatively blank. So basically we're trying to say, will Y be more positive or negative than Y? And then we're also trying to figure out which way will electrons go. So first things first, as always with a Lenz law question, just say, how do you resist this? So something's coming towards you. How do you resist it? You push it away. You repel it. Okay, what's coming towards you? A south. How do you resist a south coming towards you? You get a south near it, right? And then by default, a north is on the other side of you. Okay, so we're doing electron flow. This is a circular current in a straight magnetic field, right? So take out so we're going to use our second left-hand rule, okay? Thumb points towards north. I'm going to let you try it. Which way do you think electrons will flow in this ring? Okay, so hopefully your fingers look something like that right now. Okay, these are your knuckles and your fingers. The electrons are flowing around and then back kind of behind them, right? So when you do that on here, you see that, electrons will go from here to here. So where will they move from? From Y to X. So get rid of A and B. Now, if electrons are going from Y to X, what will Y look like? So electrons are leaving Y to go to X. Electrons are negative, so if they're leaving Y, what are they leaving Y as when they're gone? Well, they're leaving Y as more positive, right? When negatives leave, the remainder is more positive. So Y to X and positive. Okay, a positively charged ion travels through a region that contains perpendicular electric and magnetic fields. Interesting. The ion passes through the region undeflected at a constant speed. Okay, so if it passes through undeflected, what can we say about the net force? Well, if there was a net force, it would have been deflected. So we can kind of just think, okay, force is balanced, or F net equals 0. So whatever forces are acting on this thing, because it's a charged ion in an electric and magnetic field, so there definitely are forces acting on it. However, they are going to have to cancel each other out, okay, because it is not deflected. Now it's positively charged, so what does that tell us we're going to use? Some kind of right-hand rule. Since it's an external magnetic field, probably the third right-hand rule. Okay, and it even tells us this is the negatively charged plate, and this is the positively charged plate. Okay, so what would a positively charged ion want to do if there were no magnetic field? Let's think about that. If I were a positively charged magnetic field, what would I want to do if there were no magnetic field? This is just electric. Well, I would want to get away from that positive plate and go up towards that negative plate, right? Okay, by the way, what does E look like? E would be what a positive charge would do. Since we have a positive charge, we can think about it that way. That's E. Maybe it doesn't matter, but never know. Good to just slap it down while we're thinking about it. But it doesn't do that. It goes undeflected, right? So just to remind ourselves, equals path if there only the electric field, just so we can see what that's saying, okay? The dotted line is the path if there were only electric field. So why did it not do that? Because of some magnetic field. Which way would the magnetic field have to be to stop this from happening? Well, it has to fight that, so it must be down, right? Magnetic force. Why did it not do that? Well, some force must have pushed it down, right? The magnetic force. Okay, see what I mean? We haven't even really looked at what the question's asking. Kind of maybe a bad call on my part, but often I find by just kind of setting up, looking at what you're doing, sometimes you end up answering the question anyway. So look at that. I was right. What is the direction of the electric force on the ion? Okay, so why did it deflect up if there were no magnetic force? It would have deflected up because of the electric force, right? The field direction, the electric field direction is defined as the same direction a positive test charge would feel. This is a positive charge. So Fe would indeed be up, right? So that is number 5. Direction of the electric field in the region, see what I tell you. Sometimes just by thinking about the scenario, you end up answering the question anyway. Electric field, up, 5. Direction of the magnetic force on the ion, holy, we're on a roll, okay? Direction of the magnetic force on the ion, we're on a roll, right? Magnetic force, we already said, to stop this from happening from the electric force, magnetic force would need to be down, so that is option 6. And direction of the magnetic field in the region, so that's the last thing we kind of had to think about here. Take your which hand rule? Well, definitely a right-hand rule because it's a positive ion, but there's an external magnetic field causing a force. So this would be our third hand rule, right? So take your right hand, think about the direction the charge is moving, right? That will be your thumb, and we know the direction the force needs to be, so that will be your palm. Where are your fingers pointing if you line those two things up? You should be seeing your right thumb. Okay, so this is essentially what you should be looking at right now with your hand. I'll give you some nice nail polish so you can tell what your direction is, but your palm should be pointing down because we know the magnetic force is down, right? And your thumb should be pointing off to the right because that's how the positive charge was moving, which means what is the magnetic field doing? It's coming at you. It's whatever your fingers are doing, right? So it's coming at you. So that is number 0, right? To get this force, you would need a magnetic field out of the page. Are those perpendicular, like it said? Is the magnetic field B perpendicular to the electric field E? Yeah, right? Okay, last thing. So a positively charged sphere is suspended on the end of an insulated string. So a positively charged sphere, so right away I'm thinking probably right hand rule, is suspended on the end of an insulated string. So that just basically means charge is not going to escape up the string. In the region between two vertical metal parallel plates that are connected to a coil of wire. A magnet is suddenly thrust into the coil of wire. So a magnet is thrust. What does that make you think of? Thrust into the coil of wire. What law does that make you think of that we've learned fairly recently? We have a magnetic field being shoved into a current carrying conductor, right? So let's just quickly, because I bet it's going to be important. If this magnetic field is pushed, what is the result going to be over here? Since there's a current carrying conductor to resist it, it will. How do you resist a south coming at you? Well, you repel it with a south, right? Making this end a north. Okay? Now, if the magnet is moved as illustrated below, then the direction of the motion of the positively charged sphere is, oh, what a good question. This tests quite a few things. Okay, so this brings pretty much our whole unit 2 together. I love it. So, okay, so I was wrong. So we're actually not going to use the right hand rule. I was just reading that and thinking ahead. What's important, though, what that will be important for is our law of charges. Okay, so essentially we have to figure out what's plate 1's charge going to be and what's plate 2's charge going to be, because that will determine whether this positive ball will go towards it or away from it, right? We have to figure out how is the positive ball going to move. So when this magnet is shoved towards this, we already established that this will be the poles to resist that change. Now we have a curly current, a circular current, so that's going to be our second hand rule. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and do current. I'll do right hand. So your thumb points towards north and your fingers represent the current. So I'll give you a second to try it out on your own. Okay, but that's what my fingers look like. If this is current, right, what are they doing? They're wrapping around front, wrapping down in the front, right? So that means, okay, follow the current, follow the wire on the solenoid, zoop, zoop, and then zoop. So this would be building up current, right? Of course, it's not really flowing, but current we can think of as a positive charge moving. So that would be building up a positive charge, right? Whereas, where are all these positive flowing charges come from? Well, look, they're going here and then, so positive charges are quote unquote leaving here. We know that truly electrons are actually going to be the ones moving, right? But we can still think about it in the same way. So this positive current is going to be leaving here to come do this flow. So this plate is going to be left negative when its positives leave. Really quick, try with electron flow. So take your left hand, okay, take your left hand and do it the other way. You should get, okay, but you should get something like that for electrons. So same north pole, so that your thumb doesn't change, but now your fingers will be curling away from you in the back, right, and up in the front. So these are your knuckles, not your fingernails, right? So electrons will do this, right? Those are what electrons would do. Blue is what current would do. And so you can get the same result in the end, right? Electrons would leave here, leaving it positively charged, go and then through here, and then electrons would build up here. Of course, that's what would really happen because electrons are the ones that flow, but either way, you end up with the same result. So in the end, what would that positive charge end up doing? Well, would it want to go towards this positive plate? Or would it want to go towards this negative plate? Opposites attract, like repel. So it would jump towards plate 2. Okay, and there we go. That is Unit 2 wrapped up. Remember, folks, I'm always here for Flex. It's on Google Meet or by email. Even if you just want to talk, you don't have a question, I could use some human contact in the isolation chamber that is room 210. Have a great spring break. We'll resume posting material after.